Embarrassing someone is akin to murder. The way that we call murder, the expression for murder is shvichas damim, the spilling of blood. So when you make the blood move inside the person to their face, at least in the way that it's perceived and seen, their face turns red, that's also a form of spilling blood. So it's as if in the rabbi's eyes, you've killed a person.
What is the Torah Broker? Myself as a Torah broker, my purpose is to reintroduce Torah to unaffiliated Jewish men by producing and distributing little bite-sized pieces of Torah, exciting pieces of Torah, as well as videos of rabbis like Rabbi Bronsteyn, so that we're fulfilling our purpose and improving the quality of our life. We have our guest here, Rabbi Bronsteyn. So, Rabbi, would you tell us in more detail what the total composition of the Torah is, please?
Okay, yes. So the translation of the word Torah means teaching, means to teach. And the basic tenet of Judaism is that God created the world, created the universe. And of course, he put people on the universe, as it's told in Genesis. And of course, God would not leave people to their own devices without giving them an instruction manual of how to navigate the world and how to navigate themselves. So Torah, conceptually, is the teaching of God. It is how to navigate our lives. Over 3,300 years ago, the basic tenet, as it says in Exodus, that the entirety of the Jewish people, 2-3 million people, had a divine revelation where God gave them his manifest, his instructions, how to navigate the world. And we call that Torah.
That is the 5 books of Moses, the Pentateuch, the Old Testament, right?
Has 2 parts. The first part is what we call the written Torah, or the written law, as we call it. In Hebrew, it's Torah Shebiksav. That written law is the way that we identify it as the Torah scroll. Moses, at the end of his life, wrote down the Torah scroll, which is the Pentateuch, which is the 5 books of Moses. We call the 5 books of Moses because he wrote them down. And he gave a Torah scroll. He actually wrote a Torah scroll for every tribe. And he gave each tribe a Torah scroll. That's the written law. Now, of course, the written law is very terse and it's difficult to understand. Anybody who's ever tried to pick up the Bible, who's ever tried to study the verses themselves, will find that they're challenged in how to understand them properly. And so therefore, God explained the 5 books of Moses to Moshe, how to understand them, how to derive laws from them, how to derive lessons from those words. That is known as the Torah Sheba'al Peh. That is known as the oral law, meaning the law that was given to Moses orally. God spoke to Moses and told him the explanation of the Torah when he gave him the Torah 3,300 years ago. So that's the oral law. That is the basic composition of the entirety of the Torah.
Rabbi, walk us through the various components of the oral law, including the Talmud, the Gemora, the Mishna.
So the oral law was oral for many years, meaning that it was handed down from one rabbi to another rabbi. We're talking about scholars of very good caliber, of strong caliber, very scholarly and wise. Maimonides describes this tradition that we have. It is also described in the Ethics of Our Fathers, from Moses to Joshua, Moshe to Yeshua, and it was oral. Then it was written down about the time of the year 200 of the Common Era. And that was known as the Mishnah. So the Mishnah was compiled by Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. We call him Rabbeinu HaKadosh, the Holy Rabbi. And it was written down, divided into 6 sections, dealing with all kinds of different laws. And then it was passed down from one generation to another generation. We have that text, it's called the Mishnah, and there's many commentaries on it. The Mishnah also is a little bit ambiguous because the Mishnah itself is contradictory from one Mishnah to another. That's called Gemora. Gemora is the study of the Mishnah. So therefore, there was also developed in the next 200 years the Talmud by two rabbis called Ravina and Ravashi. The Talmud is the explanation of the Mishnah. Gemora in Aramaic means teaching also, to teach. And it is to describe the material, but the material itself is the explanation of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is divided into sections called Sedarim. There are 6 Sedarim. 1 Seder, 2nd Seder, 3rd Seder, 4th Seder, dealing with different topics. Each Seder has Masechtos. It has tractates of Mishnah and then tractates of Gemara. You can study the Mishnah by itself. But if you pick up any tractate of Gemara, you will find on the pages, the Mishnah is printed there also. You can open up any tractate, you'll see the Mishnah printed there, and then following that Mishnah, the explanation.
So let's give the men a flavor of what this looks like. So let me introduce a couple subjects, and then you expound on anyone that you really like. The one I really like are damages, which is an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. I think this is probably one of the most misunderstood concepts outside of Judaism.
So there's a tractate in one of the Sedarim of the Mishnah called Seder Nezikin. It's called the Order of Damages. And it has various Masechtas. It has tractates. One of the Masechtas is called Bava Kama, the first gate. The first gate deals with property, with a person being responsible for their property, that the property doesn't damage other people's property. In that tractate, there is a discussion about this verse, chapter 8 maybe, about an eye for an eye. And it's very clear that it means money. It doesn't mean an eye for an eye. The question would be, though, that why did the Torah express it in that way? If it's not literal, why didn't the Torah just say that if a person cuts somebody's arm off or they pluck their eye out, that they should pay? Instead, the Torah says that it should be an eye for an eye. We can maybe speculate, or we could just say that the Torah wants to communicate to us the gravity of the crime. The gravity of the crime is the person really deserves to lose their eye also. Because that's what they did to the person. The other person lost their eye, they should lose their eye also. That's not the way the law goes. But that's how terrible they did what they did was.
Just to clarify there, when you say that's what the law says, that's what the guidebook, the operating manual for humans that God wrote, tells us.
Yeah, we're discussing, like we introduced the Torah. So through the Torah.
So none of this is somebody helped prompt God with an editorial here or an insertion there. The core data is divine and from God.
Let me just say like this. You're bringing up an interesting point, which might be beyond the scope of our discussion. We believe that the God's law is divine, which means that it precedes the existence of the universe. The same way that God precedes the existence of the universe, because God, think about it, before God created the universe, there was no universe. So God's existence preceded the existence of the universe. The laws of God are coming from God, which means that since they come from God, they also, the same way that God precedes the existence of the universe, his laws do also. So when somebody damages someone, it's not that it's a reaction that God says, oh, look, so-and-so damaged someone. We got to make him pay. It doesn't work like that. There is a godly truth before even the existence of the universe that a person who damages has to pay. So it's not, like you said, making up for something or reacting to it. The law is already on the books even before it happens. If you wanted to plug it into truth and godliness, that's what we're doing when we're following the law.
So if we go to that example of the dog bite, you're walking with your family through the neighborhood, and God forbid, a dog, an aggressive dog, shows up out of nowhere, attacks one of your family members. My layperson's understanding of it would be the father of the child who got attacked would go to the rabbi and he'll ask questions like, was the dog on a leash? Has he bit before? Were there witnesses? Is the owner, was he supervising the dog? Was the dog with one of his children. How old was the children? Was it at the neighbor's house? Which would then be weighed in ultimately a decision for damages, right?
Well, this is also discussed in the same tractate, but in a separate section. The truth is, before we even start the conversation, there is a law on the books that one is not allowed to own a dangerous animal. So if somebody owned an animal that can kill somebody, that animal would be prohibited to be owned, and it would be put down right away.
Rabbi, you're at risk. You're living in an environment where people randomly break into people's houses. They need protection. Under those circumstances, that sort of an animal would not be a deterrent and acceptable to own.
I'm not sure if it would. It would depend on the circumstances. But generally speaking, even in secular law, we have such things. I'm not sure if this is true because I'm not a lawyer, but I once heard that you can't have like a electric wire in your house, that when the burglar breaks in, he'll touch it and get electrocuted. I don't think that's permitted. There are limits to the self-defense that a person can have. There are certain things that are not allowed, and a person is not allowed to own a dangerous animal. Now, if the animal would not be dangerous, whatever the parameters of that is, then in that case, we would just say that it would be just like any other animal that does damage. And then we would have to evaluate the damage that it does, and the owner would be responsible.
Well, thank you for that, Rabbi. Let's move to that subject of theft. I find this to be an amazing area. And I think if you're in the Kollel and you see all the Gemaras there's quite a few actual volumes. I don't know if they're tractates that talk about theft.
When you steal from somebody, then you, in essence, don't respect the person as a human being. And when you don't respect the person as a human being, then the person doesn't exist anymore.
So is this connected?
It doesn't mean that it's worse than murder, for example.
Well, isn't there a Torah concept that embarrassing someone and the blood that comes to the face is some version of murder?
Yeah, it's true that embarrassing someone is akin to murder. The Talmud says that their face turns red because the blood rushes to their face when they're embarrassed. And the way that we call murder, the expression for murder is shvichas damim, the spilling of blood. So when you make the blood move inside the person to their face, at least in the way that it's perceived and seen, their face turns red, that's also a form of spilling blood. So it's as if in the rabbi's eyes, you've killed a person.
They seem to be interconnected, right? You steal something from somebody, he doesn't feel good about it. Maybe this blushing thing occurs, which is now in the realm of murder, a diluted version of the murder. Is there a connection there? Am I just making this up?
What is the difference between embarrassing somebody and murdering them?
No, this idea of theft. You said that theft is ignoring, reducing, eliminating the person as you take his property, which would feel to some degree close to embarrassment, murder, or something like that. No?
Yes. I mean, the ultimate eliminating the person's right to exist is killing them when they no longer exist. That's the question you're asking.
But in the Torah, that famous scenario where Esav's grandson caught Yaakov and was instructed to kill him, right? And Yaakov said, look, take all my property, take it. It's like I'm dead anyways, right? Expand on that, Rabbi.
Okay, so you're referring to the statement of the rabbis that a person who's poor is considered as if they're dead. The question is, what does it mean? What does that mean?
Right.
They're not dead. They're just poor.
Right.
This is the way the commentary of the Maral explains that a person who's poor is somebody who cannot act in the world. They can't make a difference because they just don't have the means to do so.
So you're saying like fundamentals like buying challah for Shabbos or sending your kid to school?
Supporting their families, educating their child. They can't make a difference in any shape, way, or form. They're powerless. Being powerless is like being dead because a person who's dead is ultimately powerless. I was just listening to, I forgot, somebody was telling me that the VO2 max which is a measurement of how much oxygen your body can absorb. If a person reaches the level of 18, VO2 max of 18, they can't get up out of a chair. They can't walk up a flight of stairs. So a person who can't do anything, they're incapacitated. It's as if that's what a dead person is. A dead person ultimately is a person who's incapacitated, can't do anything. So that a person who's poor, in that aspect that they're powerless, are considered as if they're dead. That's what the rabbis mean.
I remember that not having children and being without sight are the other two that would cause someone to be defined as dead also.
Yes, there's actually 4, but you're asking about those 2. A person who does not have any children, what are children? Children is the propagation of a person's power in the world. A person who is able to move through history, so to speak, move through time, is a person who's acting in the world. A person who's childless, I don't mean to be insensitive, that God gives and God takes for children. We should all be well, and we should all have success and happiness. But a person who doesn't have children, in a sense, is powerless, that they can't propagate their power, their influence through time, through the future.
Mm-hmm.
So from that aspect, they also lack the power. So they may have the money, but the money stops when they pass. So therefore, a person who's childless is also considered like they're dead. The third one was seeing. A person who cannot see is a person who cannot be with people because they can't see. Disability prevents them from being with people. They can't interact and mingle with people. They could, but there needs to be a lot of help, and it's not going to be the same as a person who's independent with sight. In that way, they're powerless also to have influence on people. That's why they're considered also as if they're no longer, from that aspect, they're also considered like the dead. The fourth one is mitzoras, a spiritual disease, which is described in Leviticus. It's commonly known as leprosy, but it's not really.
Right.
You ask all the medical expert doctors about this disease called tsaras,
right.
They'll say that it was a spiritual disease. One of the laws that a person who contract this disease is they have to be put outside the camp.
Right.
They have to be separated from the rest of the community. Well, being separated from the rest of the community in the eyes of the rabbis, a person lacks power. They lack influence. And so from that perspective, they're also considered as if they're not alive.
Wow. I always wanted to live like I was 12 years old. A bicycle, a baseball glove, a couple of buddies, clean bed, no taxes, no money, no kids, no car repairs, no insurance, no employees, no bosses, no clock to punch, just a simple existence. And what I've discovered is that the closer I've gotten to the Torah, the more manageable life seems to become. And so with that, let's segue into this notion of how the Torah tells us to get dressed. Get dressed. Can you imagine God's going to tell us how to get dressed? I do this, right? Top to bottom, right to left. Or is it right to left, top to bottom? Rabbi, you want to talk more about that?
Generally speaking, that the concept is, as we mentioned, the Torah is all-encompassing. It encompasses almost every area of life. And so therefore, there's always a way to do things. And it includes getting dressed. The same way that there's a way to manage one's money, the way to have a relationship, there's also a way of how to get dressed too. And there's laws in the books that tell you how to do that. The point is, everything that we could do in life could be purposeful. We go through life, we do a lot of different things. But it's seemingly a lot of things we do has no purpose and no meaning and nothing. But when we discover that there is a way to do things that are godly in every aspect of our lives, including in how we get dressed, then every part of our lives can be infused with meaning, that we're doing something meaningful, that we're following God's word, that we're being spiritual by doing it this way instead of that way.
Nice. Thanks, Rabbi. The 3 things the world stands on. Why not 10? 20. 3 sounds like it's inadequate. I mean, the whole idea of 3, I know that a table with 4 legs seems to have more stability than a table with 3. Do you have some thoughts on that, Rabbi?
Well, first of all, you're referring to the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot,
Right.
in chapter 1, Ethics of Our Fathers, that says, Al Shlosh Dvarim Ha'olam Ha'omed, the world stands on three things. Al Torah, on Torah that we're discussing. Al Avoda, on service, which is the divine service in the temple and prayer. Al Gemilas Chasadim, and on kind acts. Those are the three things. And you're asking why three, why not four, why not? I mean, first of all, the first answer to that is maybe it's only three things. It's like, well, we're picking between 6 and 7 and 10 and 12. So the answer is, yeah, it could be 6 or 7 or 10 or 12, but it just happens to be three. A person walks into the room and he says, I have one brother. They're going to say to him, how come you don't have two brothers or three brothers or four brothers? Maybe he only has one brother, right? So that maybe the world only stands on three.
Right.
But even let's assume that the world could have stood on two things or four things. Why would the number be three? If you ask me to speculate, I would say one leg for sure doesn't stand. Two legs don't stand. A tripod is the first time that something stands. You have a camera, we have cameras here. They're on tripods. That's the first point at which when you have three things is when something stands. So you can say that the Mishnah is saying, Al Shlosh Dvarim Ha'olam Ha'omed, the world is standing on these three things because that's the minimal. That's what makes the world stand, on these three things. It's a tripod that supports the world. Or you could say, the verse says, if you have a string that's made up of three strings, it doesn't get ripped so much. Let's say you have a string that's one string. But if you weave it into three strings, if you have a rope, it's very hard to cut it. The verse says that three strings don't get cut so much. So you could say that the three things on which the world stands is because you have these three things, then the world solidifies stronger with these three things because they're intertwined with each other to make the connection stronger. The question we have to ask also is that what does it mean the world stands? Standing means like if I stand, for example, right? I'm standing on the ground. So that means standing. The world doesn't stand. It's a planet that is in the solar system. The world doesn't stand on a tripod. If you have solid feet on which the top of the table stands on, that's what you stand on. But these are concepts. Torah is a concept. The teaching of God. Service is a concept. Connection to God through prayer or through the services in the temple. Chesed, being involved in other people's lives and helping others. It's a concept. Those are not pillars or legs upon which something stands. So what does it mean that the world stands on these three things? Obviously, the rabbis are not being literal about it. They're being figurative about it. They're telling us that the survival of the world, the purpose that makes the world continue to exist is these three things. The world doesn't literally stand on it, figuratively stands on it. Maybe because we didn't have that in the generation of the flood. That's why the world sort of ceased to exist. And the people of the generation of the flood were wiped out because they didn't have these three things. That's what it means that the world is not standing.
So we go through the world. We meet different people, different belief systems, not just spiritual or religion, but how the world works, how the world came into being, how it functions. You take a physical reality like the sun, 93 million miles away from planet Earth in a perfect rotation. If it's a million miles closer, we barbecue. A million miles further at 94 million, we freeze. One of the things maybe the viewers need to realize here is we don't proselytize. Jews aren't looking for converts. But in my own life, coming across people who say, there's no God. How could it be argued that such a reality as the sun is not a truth, an absolute truth, that there's some power that controls this?
So you're asking me to make the argument in the reverse.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, first from the Judaism perspective, we are of the belief that every human being has absolute free choice. Free choice means that they are free to choose whatever they want, even if it makes no sense whatsoever. That means that they can choose good or they could choose evil. If it would be obvious to every person that there is a God and that there is goodness and that they have to choose it, there would be no free choice. So God designed the world in such a way that people have the opportunity to choose whatever they want. They could choose God or reject him. And they're not going to get struck by lightning if they do that. Because if they do, the people who are watching are going to say, I'm not going to do that. And then the free choice goes away. God created a being that's able to spurn him and reject him if he wants. He's free to do whatever he wants. Therefore, you're never going to find an absolute proof of existence of God. If God would peel away the curtain and say, here I am, then the world would be finished because there would be no more reason for it to exist.
So we could eat bacon and cheeseburgers and shrimp and all that stuff.
If you so choose. If you so choose. That's why a person is free to choose. But so now, if you say, what you're referring to is you look at the sun and you say, it's the perfect distance in your mind, it's the perfect distance from the earth. Truth is, you're right. We have a planet that's a little bit off that shows us what could be. That planet is Mars. Mars is just a little bit too far away from the sun. You know, in the science fiction, they have this thing called terraforming, where you can change a planet to make it livable like planet Earth. But the truth is, it's not livable. You would have to live in a container like we do in the Arctic that protects us from the elements. Planet Earth is the only livable planet that we know that humans can live on, where there's just enough heat, the temperature is just right, just enough oxygen, etc. And it almost seems like, if you look carefully, situation was set up by God. That is what the philosophers call the design theory. The design theory means I look at the world and I instinctively feel like it was designed by somebody. Not that it just came haphazard into the world, but it was designed that way. You know, you walk into your teenager's room, you open the door, and you see that the world was not designed. It's total chaos, right? You walk into an adult room and you see that it's put together, everything is in its place, everything's clean and neat. See that it was designed. The example that they give, the philosophers is you're walking through the desert, and all of a sudden you see in the desert a fully functional 747 with the cockpit, with the wings, and it flies. You're a pilot, you get into it, it flies. So the person next to you says, over billions of years, there has been movement in the universe, the coming together and expansion of molecules, and by accident, I know the odds are against it, but by accident, this plane was formed. That's how it just came into being. So your instinctive reaction is, no, that's crazy. Somebody built this plane. There's a human that built this plane. So you look at the sun, you look at the world, you look at the human body, and you say, that's crazy. Somebody must have designed that. So you're saying, how could people possibly believe that there is no God after they see that? One answer is that they just don't think about it. People don't think in those terms. People are born, they find themselves in the world, they're used to it, and they just don't think about it. If they do think about it, there are plenty of philosophers that have excuses. They say it's a design theory because in our experience, we have design. But we've never seen a universe form from a big bang by itself. So since we've never seen that, how do we know how it forms? Maybe this is the way it forms. And just because we see and it looks like it's designed, doesn't mean that our assumption is right. Maybe it is whatever it is, evolution, survival of the species. The world evolved this way. You're going to say, what are the chances? Chances are small, but it happened over billions and billions and billions of years. That's a very long time. So for that, a person can say, I don't believe in God. I just don't. He's not in my experience. He's not in my world. I have nothing to do with him. I never saw him. I don't know who he is. I don't believe in him.
Got it. Thank you, Rabbi Bronsteyn, for adding so much amazing Torah content for the viewers. We probably touched on 6 or 8 different subjects, any one of which that resonates with the viewers can call a rabbi that they can dig deeper into these subjects. Perhaps they can Google somebody Thank you for watching.